Let's get the latest on the ground. Mia, thank you so much for your time this evening. Of course, reports suggesting that Palestinian factions in Lebanon are eager to open a second front against Israel, but they do want Hezbollah to be able to assist them. Is that also what is unfolding on the ground? Give us a sense of what's going on.
Well, it certainly seems so. We just had on Monday these developments of more airstrikes, of gunfights in which the Israeli Defense Forces have killed armed suspects. And we now have confirmation that this attack, which sparked the whole day of strikes between the two parts. But this first attack was actually done by the Islamic Jihad here in Lebanon, saying that this attack is part of the wider Al-Aqsa operation that started in Gaza on Monday. So certainly it seems like the pro-Palestinian groups here in Lebanon are starting to move. We also know that one of those armed suspects that were killed by Israeli forces belongs to Hezbollah. They just confirmed that to us now. And on the ground, we are still seeing a lot this Israeli air raid being carried out by a helicopter using even phosphorus bombs, according to Lebanese media. However, one thing that is important to underline here is that these strikes are not actually targeting civilian areas. They are dropping on mostly bushes and forested areas, and as we know, Israel has a very strong military technology-wise, and so it is not by accident that they are actually not hitting anything besides these uninhabited areas. It's a sign that Israel is not looking forward really to start another conflict on its northern borders, as it is still very much trying to stop what is happening down in the south next to Gaza.
Now, Mia, we are, of course, watching, in fact, what's happening out of the United Nations, waiting for the Secretary-General António Guterres to, deliver a message on this particular situation that is escalating. So when that begins, we will cut out of this particular briefing, of this particular, interview. But let's talk about, what is happening on the ground right now. A lot of people, as much as this is not aimed at civilians, there's surely some panic, a country possibly on edge right now, because if this happens, it could drag Lebanon and the region into a catastrophic conflict. And Mia, I'm going to ask you just for a second before you answer. We're going to the, in fact, the UN now and get that address.
Developments in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. Let me begin by repeating my utter condemnation of the abhorrent attacks by Hamas and others against Israeli towns and villages in the Gaza periphery, which have left over 800 Israelis dead and more than 2,500 injured. Sadly, these numbers are expected to rise as the attacks are ongoing and many remain unaccounted for. In addition, over 100, possibly more, Israelis, civilians and military have been reported captured by armed groups, including women, children and the elderly. Some are being held hostage inside Israel, and many others have been taken inside the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad have launched thousands of indiscriminate rockets that have reached central Israel, including Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. I recognize the legitimate grievances of the Palestinian people, but nothing can justify these acts of terror and the killing, maiming and abduction of civilians. I reiterate my call to immediately cease these attacks and release all hostages. In the face of these unprecedented attacks, Israeli airstrikes have pounded Gaza. I am deeply alarmed by reports of over 500 Palestinians, including women and children, killed in Gaza and over 3,000 injured. Unfortunately, these numbers are rising by the minute as Israeli operations continue. While I recognize Israel's legitimate security concerns, I also remind Israel that military operations must be conducted in strict accordance with international humanitarian law. Civilians must be respected and protected at all times. Civilian infrastructure must never be a target. And we already have reports of Israeli missiles striking health facilities inside Gaza, as well as multi-storied residential towers and a mosque. 2 UNRWA schools sheltering displaced families in Gaza were also hit. Some 137,000 people are currently sheltering in UNRWA facilities, with the number increasing as heavy shelling and airstrikes continue. I am deeply distressed by today's announcement that Israel will initiate a complete siege of the Gaza Strip, nothing allowed in, no electricity, food or fuel. The humanitarian situation in Gaza was extremely dire before these hostilities. Now it will only deteriorate exponentially. Medical equipment, food, fuel and other humanitarian supplies are desperately needed, along with access for humanitarian personnel. Relief and entry of essential supplies into Gaza must be facilitated, and the UN will continue efforts to provide aid to respond to these needs. And I urge all sides and relevant parties to allow United Nations access to deliver urgent humanitarian assistance to Palestinian civilians trapped and helpless in the Gaza Strip. And I appeal to the international community to mobilize immediate humanitarian support for these efforts. The UN Special Coordinator and I are engaging with leaders in the region to express our concern, our outrage, and to advance efforts to avoid any spillover to the wider Middle East. Even in these worst of times, and perhaps especially in the most trying moments, it is vital to look to the long-term horizon and avoid irreversible action that would embolden extremists and doom any prospects for lasting peace. This most recent violence does not come in a vacuum. The reality is that it grows out of a long-standing conflict with a 56-year-long occupation and no political end in sight. It's time to end this vicious circle of bloodshed, hatred and polarization. Israel must see its legitimate needs for security materialized, and Palestinians must see a clear perspective for the establishment of their own state realized. Only a negotiated peace that fulfills the legitimate national aspirations of Palestinians and Israelis, together with their security alike, the long-held vision of a two-state solution in line with United Nations resolutions, international law and previous agreements, can bring long-term stability to the people of this land and the wider Middle East region. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
And that is the United Nations Secretary-General António Guterres delivering that message there on what is happening there in the Middle East, and saying that the numbers of casualties continue to rise, and that is something that is of great concern, and also condemning what is happening there, saying we recognize the legitimate grievances by both Palestine and Israel, but nothing justified these attacks on civilians, saying that women and children were killed in Gaza and the numbers continue to rise, and saying that civilians must be protected at all times. There's been schools sheltering displaced families in Gaza that he says were also hit, and saying that there's now a deep distress, especially when it comes, in fact, he says he's deeply distressed when it comes to the news that there'll now be a complete seizure of the Gaza Strip. And this, of course, is as announced by Israel earlier, and saying that nothing will be allowed in and out. But the United Nations, he says, is going to try and facilitate to ensure that those emergency supplies do, in fact, reach these particular communities in order to avert a humanitarian crisis, and also saying that this vicious cycle of bloodshed needs to come to an end. There must be a negotiated peace settlement, and of course we'll continue to monitor that. Sharon Rice-Peace is also there for us, and Mia is still with us as we look at what is happening now on the ground. Mia, we were talking about, you know, an escalation even on the Gaza Strip could result in a catastrophe, particularly for the region as well as Lebanon.
Absolutely. I mean, we are already seeing so many regional players starting to come forward with special attention to, for example, to Iran, who was one of the first countries to say they supported this attack and really showing their feathers of their power. We even have reports from the Wall Street Journal that Iran directly helped to plan this attack through meetings with Hamas here in Beirut. So a very involved a very intense involvement of Iran apparently. We have also Saudi Arabia having to basically cut its relations with Israel, those normalization of ties, that Abraham Accord that we have been talking about for so many years, that the US was so keen on pushing forward in the region, but that seems like very impossible to resume at the moment, as Saudi Arabia has come in support of Palestine and the liberation and recognition of the state and the operation, the Al-Aqsa attack. We are also seeing some in Israel also we are seeing a country that is completely taken by surprise by this attack that will weaken its position. We are already seeing economic consequences for the country that is one of the biggest arms exporters of the world. If I'm not mistaken, I believe the currency has also started to plunge, and so we are talking about an economic impact that could affect not only the region but the whole world, because Israel is in business with so many countries across the world, but also politically in the region, with Iran really making itself heard across the world, that it is a power to be taken seriously, that could have consequences, for example, on the nuclear deal with the United States. And so I think it's really just a matter that we will have to wait and see how serious this will continue to be. What are the limits that both sides will reach, and only after that the rest of the world will be able to pick up the pieces of what happened and see how, when the dust settles, to see where the power dynamics of the region have fallen.
And speaking about power dynamics, I mean, we look at what has been happening over time, particularly with Hezbollah and, those border breaching missions, something that they've been training for years now. I wonder what has been their reaction or response to, the idea, for example, saying that it has killed a number of militants. And as you were talking to us about those, who are seen to be infiltrating Lebanon. So what has been the response from Hezbollah?
Well, from the start, Hezbollah has come forward saying that they support Hamas, that they are in cooperation with Hamas in this attack, that they are ready to lend them their weapons and their power if necessary. And so Hezbollah has since the beginning come almost as a big brother for Hamas, positioning itself in these borders with Israel at the north, basically saying almost as a collateral warning that if Israel decides to further attack Hamas, if decides, for example, for a ground incursion for Hamas, then Hezbollah might attack it from the north. And we have heard from the Israelis saying that they might start a ground incursion into Gaza in the next 48 hours. And that could really be the spark that, tips the scale and makes Hezbollah really enter this conflict because until now, although we are seeing, very strong pictures of these heavy bombardments in southern Lebanon, they're really not, we don't have that much loss of life so far. We do know that one Hezbollah member has been killed so far, which that could aggravate the situation. But the reality is that we are not seeing a full-blown attack between the two parts, between Hezbollah and Israel. Only if something happens is further south, analysts say that could be what drags Lebanon into this war, which is, of course, something that we do not want.